Listen closely. Do you hear it? That sound like silk being torn underwater, like champagne glasses shattering in slow motion against marble floors. That's the sound of a woman falling in love with her own destruction, mistaking the vertigo for flight. There's an old Romanian folktale they don't tell anymore, about a village girl who fell in love with a wolf. Not a man who turned into a wolf, mind you. An actual wolf. She would leave raw meat at the forest's edge every full moon, and he would come, yellow eyes catching moonlight like coins at the bottom of a wishing well. She thought she was taming him. The wolf thought he was being patient. You know how this ends, don't you? Or do you? The twist is that she knew. She always knew. The villagers found her diary after she disappeared, page after page, describing how his teeth looked in candlelight, how she imagined them piercing her throat, how the thought made her feel more alive than any kiss from the baker's son ever could. The final entry, written in what forensics would now call an increasingly erratic hand, simply read, "Tomorrow I stop leaving the meat." And this is Machiavelli's unspoken truth about desire, the one he scribbled in the margins but never dared publish. Power isn't taken. It's offered up on a silver platter by those who confuse intensity with intimacy, who mistake being consumed for being chosen. You see it everywhere now, don't you? In the woman who texts her ex at 2 a.m., knowing he'll leave her on read until he's drunk enough to want her back. In the executive who chooses the narcissist over the stable partner because, at least with him, I feel something. In every TikTok confession about toxic relationships that starts with, "I know he's bad for me, but..." A 2024 study from the Journal of Interpersonal Violence found that individuals with anxious attachment styles were 73% more likely to describe their most intense relationships as simultaneously their most destructive. The researchers called it paradoxical attraction. The poets called it tragedy. Your grandmother called it, "That boy is no good for you," and you smiled and loved him harder. Here's what Schopenhauer understood that your therapist won't tell you. We don't want happiness. We want itself. The yearning is the point. The ache is the art. A satisfied desire is a dead desire. And we are nothing if not necrophiliacs of the heart, making love to corpses of what could have been. Picture this. A woman sits in a restaurant, waiting. The candle on her table has burned down to a nub, wax pooling like small tragedies across the white tablecloth. She's been there 2 hours. Her phone sits face up, morgue silent. She knows he's not coming. She knew when she made the reservation. She knew when she put on the red dress, the one he once said made her look like trouble. She orders another wine, not because she wants it, but because the waitress's pity is starting to show. And pity is the only thing worse than abandonment. But here's the secret she'll never admit. Not even to her diary, not even to the stranger she'll cry to in the bathroom. She chose him precisely because she knew he'd leave her waiting. Some part of her, some ancient, honest part that speaks in dreams and drunken confessions, wanted this exact scene. The abandoned woman, the tragic heroine, the beautiful disaster. Kierkegaard wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, but he was only half right. Anxiety is also the aphrodisiac of the abandoned, the perfume of the perpetually pursuing. We don't chase what runs from us despite the running. We chase it because of the running. Motion is emotion. Stillness is death. Modern dating apps have gamified this ancient hunger. Swipe, match, ghost, repeat. A 2025 University of Chicago study found that users spend 67% more time pursuing matches who show inconsistent interest patterns than those who respond reliably. The researchers were puzzled. Anyone who's ever loved a monster could have told them why. Certainty is a cemetery. Doubt is a dance floor. The velvet curtains in old theaters aren't just for decoration. They're there to hide the machinery, the ropes and pulleys that make magic look effortless. But what happens when we prefer the machinery to the magic? When we'd rather see the wizard than believe in Oz? She wants the monster because the monster makes her feel monstrous too. Not victim, accomplice. Not prey, participant in her own beautiful demolition. There's a terrible freedom in choosing your own destroyer, in pointing at chaos and saying, "Yes, you're the one who gets to ruin me." Tell me something, and be honest, though honesty is just another mask we wear. When was the last time safety made your heart race? When did comfort ever keep you up at night, replaying conversations, dissecting glances, wondering? You already know the answer. It's written in the prescription bottles you don't finish, the therapy appointments you cancel, the good ones you let go. You don't want to be well. You want to be wanted by something that might kill you. The hunger that devours its own mouth. That's what the mystics called it. The Ouroboros of desire. We feast on our own emptiness and call it love. She doesn't want you to see her. She wants you to see her seeing herself through you. There's a Japanese legend about a mirror that remembered every face it had ever reflected. One day, it began showing them all at once. Every woman who had ever looked into it, searching for beauty, finding only questions. The mirror cracked from the weight of all that wanting. They say if you find a shard, you'll see not your face, but your face watching your face, an infinite regression of observation, each reflection slightly more desperate than the last. This is what she never tells you. When she asks, "How do I look?" she's not asking about her appearance. She's asking you to be her mirror, but not just any mirror. The kind that lies beautifully, consistently, with conviction. She wants you to reflect back not who she is, but who she needs to believe she could be. Sigh. Have you ever watched a woman get ready for a date she doesn't want to go on? It's like watching someone perform surgery on their own ghost. Foundation to cover the fatigue of performing femininity. Lipstick, the color of wounds that learn to smile. She spends 2 hours becoming someone she thinks you want, never realizing you fell for her at hour 0, bedhead and borrowed t-shirt, when she forgot to perform and accidentally existed. But here's Machiavelli's joke, the one he coughed into his wine cup. Power lies not in being seen, but in controlling how you're seen, seeing yourself being seen. It's mirrors all the way down, each one slightly warped, each reflection a negotiation with reality. A 2024 Harvard study on metacognitive perception in romantic relationships found something delicious. Women report feeling most attracted to partners when they believe those partners see them as they wish to be seen, not as they are. The gap between reality and perception wasn't a bug, it was the feature. The delusion was the desire. You want to know something terrible? Something that would make Nietzsche chuckle into his mustache? She doesn't want your honesty. She wants your performance of honesty, performing her performance of authenticity. She wants you to pretend to see through her pretense while pretending you're not pretending. I once knew a woman who kept 17 mirrors in her apartment. 17. Not from vanity, she insisted, but because she needed to catch herself from every angle, to make sure she existed from all perspectives. She would walk through her apartment like it was a museum of herself, curator and exhibit both. The tragedy wasn't the mirrors. The tragedy was that she never looked directly into any of them, always sideways, always glancing, like she was trying to catch herself, not looking. "Do you think I'm pretty?" she asked me once at 3 a.m., vodka making her voice heavy as wet velvet. "You're looking for yourself in the wrong direction," I told her. "You're looking out when you should be looking through." And she left me 2 weeks later for a man who called her beautiful every morning, like an alarm clock set to validate. Last I heard, she'd added 3 more mirrors. The ancient Greeks had a word, katoptronophilia, the love of mirrors. But they meant something darker than vanity. They meant the love of the distance between self and reflection, the gap where madness lives and breeds, that half-second delay between movement and mirror movement, where you could be anyone, where you could be no one, where you could be exactly who you pretend to be. Here's what your mother never told you about women, what the dating coaches will charge you thousands to almost understand. She's not looking for someone to love her. She's looking for someone to reflect her own love back at herself, but filtered, refined, improved in the translation. She wants you to be the Instagram filter for her soul. There's a woman right now reading this, hating it because it's true. There's another woman reading this, loving it because it's true. They're the same woman. She contains multitudes, each one watching the others, judging the performance, adjusting the mask. Modern feminism tells her to love herself. Late-stage capitalism tells her to optimize herself. Her mother tells her to be herself. But which self? The one in the bathroom mirror at 6 a.m.? The one in the office window at noon? The one in your eyes at midnight? They're all different women, and she's exhausted from being all of them, but more exhausted at the thought of being just one. You think you're dating a woman. You're dating a hall of mirrors, each reflection convinced it's the real one, each one performing for the others. And the deepest secret, the one that would break her if she admitted it, she prefers it this way. The performance has become more real than whatever lies beneath it. The mask has eaten the face. Schopenhauer said, "We can never know the thing in itself, only our perception of it." But he was thinking too small. We can never know ourselves in ourselves, only our perception of others' perception of our performance of ourselves. It's enough to make you dizzy, this infinite recursion of watching and being watched. So when she asks you, "What are you thinking?" what she's really asking is, "What mirror are you being for me right now? Which version of me are you reflecting? Which one should I perform?" And when you say nothing, you're telling the truth in ways you don't understand. You're thinking nothing because you've become pure surface, perfect mirror, reflecting her back at herself without distortion or depth. You've become what she wanted. A mirror that bleeds backwards, showing her not what she is, but what she needs to see herself seeing. The cruelest question I can ask you, and I'm asking it now, in this humid darkness between us. Have you ever been loved, or have you only been used as a mirror? And follow-up question, the one that will keep you up tonight. Which would you prefer? She mourns the loss of what never existed more than what did. Here's a joke that isn't funny. A woman walks into a bar and orders a drink for someone who isn't there. The bartender says, "That's sad." The woman says, "No, what's sad is that he's more present in his absence than he ever was in his presence." She drinks both drinks. She pays for both drinks. She leaves alone, but not really. Never really alone. Haunted by the ghost of what could have been if only, if only, if only. The Portuguese have a word, saudade, for missing something that never existed. Trust the Portuguese to name what the rest of us drink to forget. But they only got it half right. It's not just missing what never was. It's being more in love with the absence than you ever were with the presence. I'll tell you a secret that will ruin you for all future relationships. Women don't fall in love with men. They fall in love with potential, with almost, with maybe, with the version of you that exists only in the subjunctive mood, Would have, could have, should have been. There's a woman in Prague who's been saving wedding magazines for 15 years. She's never been engaged, never even close. But she has 17 binders, organized by season, color-coded by theme. Spring garden ceremonies, winter wonderlands, beach destinations she'll never visit with a man who doesn't exist, yet he's more real to her than any flesh and blood disappointment could ever be. She knows his favorite wine, Barolo 2015. She knows how he takes his coffee, black, one sugar, guilt. She knows the way he'd look at her across a crowded room, that look that says, "I choose you," every single time. The living can disappoint you. The imaginary never do. A 2025 study from the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience found that the same neural pathways activated by grief are triggered when people imagine lost possible futures. The brain, it seems, can't tell the difference between mourning what was and mourning what wasn't. Pain is pain. Loss is loss. Even when what's lost never existed outside the cathedral of your skull. You want to know what Machiavelli would say about modern love? He'd laugh until he choked on his own cynicism, because we've perfected the art of falling in love with ghosts, with projections, with Pinterest boards of lives we'll never live. The prince she wants doesn't need to exist. In fact, it's better if he doesn't. Existence comes with morning breath and unpaid bills and the way he chews too loudly when he's nervous. Have you ever noticed how women describe their exes? Not the real ones, the edited versions, the director's cuts. He becomes either monster or martyr. Never just a man who was sometimes good, sometimes awful, mostly tired. Memory is the most generous editor, cutting out the mundane, highlighting the highs and lows, until what remains is a tragedy worthy of Shakespeare, not the sitcom it actually was. But here's where it gets truly dark, where Kierkegaard would nod knowingly into his coffee. She prefers the phantom limb to the real thing. The ache of absence is cleaner than the mess of presence. You can't disappoint her if you're not there. You can't fail to live up to her expectations if you exist only as expectation. There's this thing that happens, watch for it, when a woman talks about the one who got away. Her eyes don't fill with sadness. They fill with something else, something hungry and satisfied at once, because he didn't get away. She let him go rather than let him become real. She preserved him in amber, perfect in his potential, ruined only by the possibility of reality. I knew a therapist once who told me, after too much wine, after her divorce papers were signed, that half her female clients were grieving relationships that existed primarily in text messages, paragraphs of analysis about three-word responses, dissertations on the meaning of emoji choices. They'd meet these men twice, maybe 3 times, but the relationship, the real relationship, happened in the gaps, in the waiting, in the imagining what he meant when he said, "Sure, sounds good." The phantom limb throbs at night. That's what amputees say. The missing hand itches. The absent foot aches. And so does the love that never was, throbbing in the dark, demanding to be scratched, impossible to soothe. Because how do you heal from something that never happened? Here's what's really happening when she stalks his Instagram at 2 a.m., scrolling back years, looking for clues. She's not trying to understand who he is. She's trying to understand who she would have been with him. She's mourning not just him, but the version of herself that died when the possibility died. The woman who would have learned to like craft beer because he did. The woman who would have moved to Portland, adopted a rescue dog, learned to knit. That woman is dead now, but she was never alive, and that's the exquisite tragedy of it all. Schopenhauer said life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. But he missed the third position, the phantom position, where life swings between what is and what should have been, never quite landing on either. You think she wants closure? She doesn't want closure. Closure would mean it's over, and if it never really began, it can never really end. She can carry it forever, this perfect grief, this untarnished tragedy, this love story where nobody disappoints anybody because nobody really shows up. The cruelest truth about the phantom limb of love: it feels more real than real love. Real love is complicated, disappointing, daily. Phantom love is pure, eternal, perfect in its impossibility. Real love requires compromise. Phantom love requires only imagination. Right now, there's a woman reading this, and she's thinking about him. Not the him who exists, who's probably asleep next to his wife or swiping through Tinder or dead these past 5 years. She's thinking about the him who lives in the parallel universe where everything went right, where timing aligned, where they were both different people who made different choices. Let me ask you something, and don't lie. Lying would ruin the game. Who do you love more? The women who left you or the women who stayed? And before you answer, consider this. The women who left you get to remain perfect in their leaving. The women who stayed had to become human, the phantom limb of love. It aches on rainy days. It throbs when certain songs play. It itches when you see strangers who walk like he did, laugh like she did, exist like they never quite managed to. And the most beautiful, terrible part? You wouldn't amputate it if you could. The phantom pain has become more precious than any real pleasure could ever be. She feeds on emptiness until fullness becomes a threat. Listen, in the mountains of Tibet, there's a meditation practice where monks sit for days without food, training themselves to find nourishment in hunger itself. They say that after the third day, the body stops screaming and starts singing. After the 7th, you can taste colors. After the 10th, you understand that emptiness isn't the absence of fullness. It's its own presence with its own weight, its own terrible satisfaction. Now let me tell you about modern love. She hasn't eaten a full meal in front of a man since 2019. Not because she's not hungry. God, she's starving. But because hunger has become her most reliable companion. It never lies to her. It never leaves. It whispers constantly, "You exist, you exist, you exist," in the hollow drum of her stomach. There's a woman who texts me sometimes, always at the liminal hours, 4:47 a.m., 11:23 p.m., times that don't quite belong to day or night. She says things like, "I broke up with him because he loved me too much," and "I feel most powerful when I'm empty," and "Do you think anyone ever really gets full?" I tell her about Simone Weil, the philosopher who starved herself to death out of solidarity with occupied France. Weil wrote, "We must learn to love the void, for it is the only thing that cannot disappoint us." My late-night texter says, "Exactly," and then disappears for 3 months, returning thinner, sharper, more translucent, like she's becoming her own ghost one declined dinner at a time. Here's what Machiavelli knew, but wrapped in political metaphor. Power isn't about having, it's about not needing. The moment you're full, you're vulnerable. The moment you're satisfied, you've lost. Better to cultivate an eternal, sustainable hunger. Better to make friends with the void. A 2024 University of Stockholm study on affective deprivation in romantic dynamics found that individuals who reported feeling emotionally undernourished in relationships also reported feeling more in control and authentic. The researchers were baffled. They shouldn't have been. Control is just another word for careful starvation. You want to know the real reason she leaves good men? They try to feed her. They show up with flowers and consistency and available Saturday nights. They offer presence, reliability, answers to texts within reasonable time frames. And she runs, not because she doesn't want these things, but because accepting them would mean admitting the hunger. And the hunger has become home. There's this thing that happens in long-term starvation. The body begins to digest itself. Muscle first, then organs, finally the heart eating itself to keep beating. Watch a woman in love with emotional unavailability, and you'll see the same process. She'll consume her own hope to fuel her longing, digest her own self-worth to maintain the high of being barely chosen. I'll paint you a picture. It's Tuesday night. She's made dinner for two, but she's eating alone again. The empty chair across from her isn't empty. It's full of possibility. If he were here, he might disappoint her. He might chew with his mouth open, might check his phone during conversation, might be boringly human. But in his absence, he's perfect. And she can drink wine and imagine conversations where he says exactly what she needs to hear, in exactly the right tone, at exactly the right moment. She posts a photo of the meal on Instagram. "Table for one," she writes, with that emoji that means both love and lying. Within minutes, the comments flood in. "Queen, self-love, you don't need anyone." And she hearts each comment while pushing food around her plate, creating the illusion of eating without consuming anything, mastering the art of public fullness and private famine. Nietzsche said, "One must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But he didn't mention that the chaos is just organized hunger, and the star is just the hallucination that comes from starving long enough to see light where there's only lack. The feast of starvation has its own menu, breadcrumbs of attention, served sporadically. Promises, deconstructed and never assembled. Hope, tartare, raw and dangerous. Love, molecular, all essence, no substance. Commitment, foam, impressive to look at, dissolves on contact. She's become a connoisseur of almost nothing, able to survive on interactions so minimal they barely register as contact. A liked story on Instagram becomes a feast. A hey text at 1 a.m. becomes a declaration. She's learned to photosynthesize indifference, to turn neglect into nutrients. But here's the secret she'll never admit, the one that would horrify her friends at brunch. She doesn't want more. More would ruin everything. More would mean admitting that she's been starving. More would mean learning to digest real food again. And her system has adapted so perfectly to emptiness that fullness would feel like dying. There's a certain beauty in this controlled starvation, isn't there? A terrible, elegant beauty. Like those glass flowers at Harvard, perfect, eternal, and completely unable to grow. She's become her own curator, preserving herself in perpetual hunger, mistaking the growl for a roar. You think you're offering her love, but you're offering her obesity of the soul. She's spent so long being empty that emptiness has become her identity. Who would she be if she were full? Just another satisfied woman with nothing to long for, nothing to perform, nothing to post about at 2 a.m. when the hunger keeps her awake and feeling special. The monks in Tibet eventually have to eat, or they die. But emotional starvation can be maintained indefinitely. You can spend an entire lifetime almost satisfied, forever on the verge of fullness, never quite arriving. It's sustainable suffering, renewable resource of want. Here's my question for you, and I want you to sit with it like hunger. When was the last time you were truly full? Not your stomach, your soul. When was the last time you weren't wanting something, someone, somewhere else. And if you can remember such a time, did it feel like satisfaction or did it feel like death? Because maybe she's right. Maybe the feast of starvation is the only honest meal. Maybe we're all just pretending to want fullness while secretly cultivating our specific, special hungers. Maybe emptiness isn't a problem to be solved, but a space to be inhabited, decorated, made home. The woman who texts me at liminal hours sent me something last night. I finally understand. Hunger is just another word for hope. I didn't correct her. Hope, hunger, horror, they all start with the same letter, end in the same ache. She builds her temple from the stones of what fell apart. In the depths of the Black Forest, there's a church made entirely from the bones of plague victims. Femurs for pillars, skulls for decoration, ribs arched into flying buttresses. The locals call it beautiful. Tourists call it grotesque. Both are right. Both are missing the point. The point is, someone looked at mass death and thought, I can make something holy from this. This is the final truth, the one that tastes like copper pennies and old wine. She doesn't despite her damage. She worships it. Every scar is a stained glass window. Every abandonment is an altar. Every betrayal is a bell that rings the hours of her new religion, the Church of the Beautifully Broken. Whisper this part. She keeps a box under her bed. Inside, every movie ticket from dates that went nowhere. Restaurant receipts from anniversary dinners that preceded breakups. A dried rose from the apologetic bouquet that came too late. The engagement ring she bought herself after he didn't. She calls it her museum of almost. On bad nights, she curates it like a priest handling relics, each artifact proof that she existed, that she was almost chosen, almost kept, almost enough. Here's what happens when you try to heal her. You become a heretic in her cathedral. She's spent years, decades maybe, building this elaborate architecture of absence, this basilica of better left unsaid, and here you come with your emotional availability and your consistent communication, trying to tear it all down. Don't you understand? The ruins are the religion. A 2025 MIT study on trauma bonding and identity formation discovered something extraordinary. Subjects who strongly identified with their past trauma showed increased dopamine production when recounting painful memories. They weren't just remembering pain, they were getting high on it. The researchers called it autobiographical addiction. The wounded call it Tuesday. Nietzsche declared God dead, but he didn't mention what we'd build in his place. Now we know. Shrines to our own suffering, carefully curated and hashtagged. Each woman her own saint and sinner, her own virgin and whore, her own resurrection story that never quite gets to Sunday. Let me tell you about Sarah. Not her real name, but then again, nothing about her is real anymore. Sarah has been in therapy for 12 years. 12 years. She can quote her trauma timeline like scripture. She knows exactly which childhood event caused which attachment style, which relationship repeated which pattern. She's diagnosed, categorized, workshopped, and processed. But here's the thing. She's never gotten better. Not because therapy doesn't work, but because better would mean abandoning the cathedral she's built. And who would she be without her beautiful damage? Just another boring, healthy person with nothing interesting to say at parties. The Cathedral of Ruins has its own liturgy. Morning prayers to anxiety, afternoon hymns of past hurt, evening offerings to what if, midnight mass for the martyred self, and always, always, the collection plate passed around for sympathy. She doesn't want your pity, but she needs it, the way lungs need air. The way addicts need just one more hit. Pity is the currency in the economy of ruins. And she's gotten rich on looking beautifully broken at exactly the right angle, in exactly the right light. You think Instagram is about showing perfection? Look closer. It's about curating imperfection. Vulnerable posts that are rehearsed like Broadway shows, crying selfies with perfect mascara tears, captions about growth that never mention the part where she chooses to stay exactly where she is because the ruins have become home, and renovation would mean admitting she could have left years ago. Here's what Schopenhauer understood that your life coach won't tell you. Suffering is not a bug in the system. It's the operating system itself. And some of us have learned to be power users, to optimize our pain, to overclock our trauma until it runs faster, hotter, more efficiently than any happiness ever could. Watch what happens when she meets a man without damage. She's bored within a week. He has no sharp edges for her to cut herself on, no dark corners to explore, no tragic backstory to compete with hers. He's just fine. And fine is a four-letter word that really means not broken enough to understand my specific frequency of fractured. There's a woman reading this right now, and she's angry. Not because it's wrong, but because I'm revealing the architecture, showing the blueprints of the cathedral she's been building in secret. She's spent years perfecting her pain, and here I am suggesting it's a choice, that she could leave the ruins anytime, that she stays because the cathedral is beautiful, terrible, and most importantly, hers. But here's the plot twist, the thing that would make Kierkegaard weep into his coffee. There's strength in this, real strength, the kind that comes from looking at a wasteland and saying, "I'll make a garden here." The kind that comes from being broken so thoroughly that you have to invent a new shape. The kind that comes from making art from arterial bleeding. She's not weak. She's an architect of absence, an engineer of emptiness, a contractor of controlled demolition. She's built something magnificent from her missing pieces. And maybe that's not pathology. Maybe that's just poetry with teeth. The Cathedral of Ruins attracts a certain kind of worshiper. Men who want to save her, not understanding she's not drowning. She's conducting baptisms. Men who want to fix her, not seeing that broken is her medium, her art form, her opus. Men who want to move her into their stable, suburban churches, not realizing she's already holy in her own heretical way. Here's the thing about ruins. They last longer than what they used to be. The Colosseum is more famous in pieces than it ever was whole. Pompeii is more visited as a grave than it ever was as a city. And she's more powerful as a beautiful disaster than she ever was as someone trying to hold it all together. The final question, the one that will follow you home tonight like a stray dog that knows you have food. What if she's right? What if the Cathedral of Ruins is the only honest architecture? What if everything else, the happiness, the healing, the healthy relationships, what if that's the real delusion? Because here's what I know, what I've learned from watching women build these cathedrals. They're not just surviving their damage, they're composing symphonies from screams, painting masterpieces with their own blood, building empires on graveyards of what they used to be. And maybe, just maybe, that's not tragedy. Maybe that's triumph. The kind that doesn't look like victory to anyone who hasn't lost everything and learned to call it winning. The Cathedral of Ruins. Services every night at 3 a.m. Communion wine is always red, always bitter, always exactly what you need to stay beautifully, eternally, magnificently broken. Come as you are. Leave as you were. Nothing changes in the cathedral except the stories we tell about why we stay.